Discover the real samurai origins today. Noble, honorable, a master of the sword. This is the samurai we think we know. In this video, we explore a warrior bound by a mythic code, living and dying by the blade, a figure of romance and legend. But that image? It's a fantasy, polished over centuries of storytelling. The first samurai weren't noble swordsmen. They weren't the legendary warriors you see in pop culture. They were something far more raw and far more desperate. They were provincial guards, hired muscle and tax collectors, forged in the chaos of a crumbling empire. Their story isn't one of instant glory, but a slow, brutal climb from servant to master. To understand the samurai, you have to forget the movies, forget the legends. We have to go back to a time when peace was a distant memory and survival was the only law. This is the real story of how they were born. The setting, a fading empire. Our story starts not on a battlefield, but in the perfumed halls of the imperial capital, Heian-kyo, what we now call Kyoto. The year is 794, the beginning of the Heian period. This was Japan's classical golden age, a time when the imperial court was the center of the universe. Life for the aristocrats, there was a delicate dance of poetry, calligraphy, and endless political games. They were artists and schemers, not the administrators of a nation. And while the court was busy composing poems and arguing over shades of silk, out in the provinces, the world was cracking apart. The government's centralized system, modeled after the Chinese and known as Ritsuryo, was failing. For centuries, the idea was that all land belonged to the emperor, who'd then grant it to the people in return for taxes. To enforce this, Japan had a national army of peasant conscripts. But the system was a disaster. These peasants were farmers, not soldiers. They had no training, no real equipment, and frankly, they cared more about their own rice paddies than the interests of a faraway court. So, recognizing this total failure, the imperial government made a fateful decision. In the year 792, the National Conscript Army was officially abolished. This created a massive power vacuum. How would the state defend its borders and, more importantly, collect its taxes? The court's solution was basically to privatize security. They started relying on local strongmen and powerful provincial families to keep the peace. At the same time, land ownership itself was changing. Wealthy families, powerful temples, and even members of the imperial family began creating huge, tax-free private estates called shuanane. These estates operated like little independent kingdoms, totally outside the government's control. As more land went private, the state's tax money dried up, making it even weaker. The owners of these shoan now had a serious problem. They needed to protect their land, their harvests, and their money from bandits and rivals. Since the emperor had no army to send, they took matters into their own hands. They hired private armies, and in doing so, they created a brand new class of professional warrior, the class that would one day rule Japan. The first servants. So who were these first warriors? Forget the picture of a lone swordsman meditating under a cherry tree. The original warriors of the 8th and 9th centuries were something else entirely. They were practical men, hired to do a job. They were land managers, tax collectors, and enforcers. They were guards, and the name itself tells you everything you need to know. The word samurai comes from the verb saburao, which means to serve or to attend upon. They were literally servants. The more general term for a warrior was bushi, but the name that stuck samurai forever links them to these humble beginnings as armed retainers for a provincial lord. Their skills weren't born from ceremony, but from the brutal reality of their job. For decades, the early Japanese state fought wars against the native Emishi people in the north. Those frontier wars were a harsh but effective training ground where these early warriors perfected their signature fighting style. Their main weapon wasn't the sword, it was the bow. Specifically, they became masters of mounted archery. From a young age, they trained to fire arrows with deadly accuracy from a galloping horse. Their weapon was the yumi, a long, asymmetrical bamboo bow whose unique design gave it incredible power and made it easy to use from the saddle. A volley of arrows from a unit of mounted archers could shatter an enemy infantry charge before a single sword was drawn. The iconic katana was still a weapon of the future. Early warriors used a longer, more curved sword called a tachi, designed for slashing downward from horseback. Their armor was also all about practicality. Instead of heavy metal plates, they used lacquered leather scales laced together with silk, which gave them the flexibility a mounted archer needed. They even built their shields right into their armor as large, boxy shoulder flaps, giving them protection without sacrificing mobility. These men were not chivalrous knights. There was no formal code of Bushido to guide them. That philosophy would be written centuries later, an ideal created during an era of peace. In the 8th, 9th and 10th centuries, the only code was effectiveness. Warriors were valued for their martial skill, their ruthlessness and their loyalty, not to an abstract ideal, but to the man who paid them. They were the brutal solution to a practical problem. In a country with no central army, power belonged to whoever had the strongest warriors. The rise of the clans. For about a century, this new system of private warriors and powerful landowners bubbled just beneath the surface. The imperial court in Kyoto was still the symbolic heart of Japan, but real authority was quietly shifting to the provinces. These armed warrior families started out as local security, but they quickly began to consolidate power, forming alliances and building military forces loyal only to their clan leaders. By the 10th and 11th centuries, two clans, both ironically descended from emperors who had demoted their own children to save money, rose above all others, the Taira and the Minamoto. The court, getting more and more helpless, actually started hiring these powerful clans to put down rebellions and fight pirates. In doing so, they legitimized the very power that would one day make them irrelevant. The moment the court realized just how big of a threat it had created came in the year 939. A provincial warrior named Taira no Masakado, a descendant of Emperor Kanmu, launched the first great samurai-led uprising in Japanese history. Masakado's story is a perfect snapshot of the times. It didn't start as some grand rebellion, but as a series of local squabbles with his own relatives over land. After a few ambushes and counterattacks, Masakado found himself branded an outlaw by the court. Seeing no way back, he went all in. He attacked the government headquarters in Hitachi province and, in a shocking series of raids, conquered 8 provinces. And then he did the unthinkable. Riding the wave of his success, Taira no Masakado declared himself the new emperor, Shino. He set up his own rival court in the provinces, a direct challenge to the divine authority of the emperor in Kyoto. The court panicked. This wasn't a local dispute anymore. It was a full-blown insurrection. The rebellion itself didn't last long. The court put a bounty on Masakado's head, and in 940 he was defeated and killed by a coalition of his own cousins and other rivals. They brought his severed head back to the capital as proof of their victory. But the message of Masakado's rebellion was crystal clear. A new power had been born in the provinces. A warrior acting far from the capital had proven he could seize a huge part of the country and even challenge the emperor. Masakado failed, but he had shown everyone what was now possible. The age of the court was ending. The age of the warrior clans was dawning. The turning point. Over the next 2 centuries, the rivalry between the two great warrior clans, the Taira and the Minamoto, simmered. They were the two dominant military powers in Japan, and the imperial court could do little but try to play one against the other. By the mid-12th century, the Taira had skillfully inserted themselves into court politics, essentially running the country through a puppet emperor. But their dominance bred resentment, especially from the Minamoto, who had been crushed in an earlier conflict. The breaking point came in 1180. A Minamoto prince, backed by the clan's leader, Minamoto no Yoritomo, called for war against the Taira. This ignited a 5-year nationwide civil war that would change Japan forever, the Genpei War. The Genpei War, 1180 to 1185, was the bloody climax of 400 years of change. It was the final contest to determine who would truly rule Japan, the provincial warriors or the old court aristocrats. It was a brutal conflict defined by legendary battles, dramatic betrayals, and incredible feats of arms. The Minamoto, led by Yoritomo's brilliant brother, Minamoto no Yoshitsune, steadily pushed the Taira back. The war reached its epic conclusion in 1185 at a naval battle in the Shimonoseki Strait, known as the Battle of Dan no Ura. the Minamoto fleet completely annihilated the Taira. In a tragic final act, the widow of the Taira clan's leader took her grandson, the 7-year-old Emperor Antoku, and leapt into the sea, drowning them both rather than be captured. The victory was total. The Taira clan was shattered, and the Minamoto were the undisputed military masters of Japan. But Minamoto no Yoritomo had learned from the Taira's mistakes. He knew that trying to rule from within the capital was a fool's game. Real power wasn't in Kyoto's gilded halls. It was with the warriors and the land they controlled. Instead of moving to the capital, Yoritomo set up his own government far away in his eastern stronghold of Kamakura. He called it the Bakufu, or Tent Government, a name that recalled a commander's field headquarters. In 1192, the emperor, now a powerless figurehead, granted Yoritomo the title of Sei-Tai Shogun, or Great Barbarian Subduing Generalissimo. He was now the shogun, the military dictator of the country. This was the start of the Kamakura Shogunate, Japan's first military government. It marked the formal end of the Heian period and the beginning of nearly 700 years of samurai rule. Conclusion. From guard to governor. And there it is. In the span of 4 centuries, the samurai had gone from hired provincial guards to the undisputed rulers of Japan. They started as those who serve, practical protectors of private land when the state couldn't do its job. They were horsemen and archers, their value measured in their ability to bring in a harvest or kill a rival. But as the central government crumbled, their power grew. The hired hands became warlords, local security details became massive warrior clans, and the rivalry between those clans exploded into a civil war that ended not with a return to the old ways, but with the creation of a new order, a government run by warriors, for warriors. The romantic image of the samurai, with his perfect sword and unshakable code, was mostly an invention of a later, more peaceful time. The strict code of Bushido wasn't the cause of the samurai's rise, it was a consequence of it, an attempt to create a moral identity for a ruling class that was born from centuries of violence. The real story of the samurai is one of pragmatism, ambition, and brutal necessity. It's the story of how the need for security in a failing state gave rise to a military class that would not only defend Japan, but dominate it, shaping its culture and politics for the next 700 years. The legend was built on a foundation of mud, blood, and rice. An understanding that brutal truth is the only way to understand the real story of the samurai. The Genpei War was the turning point that cemented the samurai's power, but their history is full of moments that defined them. So, what do you think? Which moment best defines the samurai? The rebellion of Taira no Masakado? The final tragic stand at Dan no Ura? Let us know in the comments below, and if you want to uncover more hidden stories from Japanese history, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon.